Probably the most challenging or tricky to teach shape in yin yoga, I would say, is saddle pose, because it really divides the crowd. And I've heard lots of yin yoga teachers tell me that they don't teach saddle because they're kind of scared of it. And they've had instances where people have struggled a lot in the class and they haven't known how to support them. And so they just don't teach it. But there are some really important things that you want to think about if you practice yin yoga or if you're a yin yoga teacher that are going to make this shape hopefully a little bit more accessible for your students or for you. So the first thing in saddle, sometimes called virasana if you're looking at hatha yoga asanas, is are you more internally rotated in your hips or are you more externally rotated in your hips? And that's got nothing to do with how much yoga you've done. It's really just the shape of your bones. Well, how do I know? How do I know if I'm internally or externally rotated? Traditionally, this shape has always been taught for the internal rotators. And if you are not internally rotated, you're probably going to feel a lot of pain on the medial sides of your knees. So the first thing that you would want to do just to check is to see how comfortable or unbearable it is for you to come to a kneeling position and sit between your feet. So you want to widen the feet out a little bit. If you're already looking at this video and going, I can't do that, then you're probably not an internal rotator. And maybe like me, you can just sit down between your feet, but your eyebrows are raising and within 10 seconds, you know you're going to need to get out because you're feeling it down here. You can probably get away with a little bit of internal rotation, but to be here for a long time is not going to be good for you. So then, can you do this shape if you're not internally rotated? Yes, of course you can. You can do it a different way. And that would be that we sit on the heels and widen the knees. So there are two different ways that you can come into this. Saddle pose primarily targets the quads and it can be extremely strong for some people. And that feeling of broad yin stretch can extend all the way up the front of the body, but it also targets the low back and that can be too strong for some people. It's just going to feel like compression in the lumbar spine. And also, if people feel a lot of discomfort at the front of their ankles, they're going to want to prop something at the front of their ankles because it might be that the pain that they're feeling is coming from the feet. All right, so let's just talk about a couple of ways that we can prop or support saddle or that you could play with in your practice. You're going to want to have some props for this. I've got a bolster. So I do think it's great to start with a bolster behind you. It's like hemming clothes. It's better to have a little bit more than not enough and then you don't have it there. So that's there. I've got a couple of blocks here as well. So depending on whether you are internally or externally rotated, so if you're internally rotated, you could sit between your feet all day or watch a whole movie on Netflix and it wouldn't bother you. Your hips allow you to do that. So if that's you, you could sit down. Some people will sit on a block here. Just be mindful, if you sit on a block and then go back, there's a possibility that it might make that lumbar compression stronger. And then bring the bolster in. And this might be okay for you if you're internally rotated. I'm just getting away with it. I don't want to be here too long. And then come down onto the bolster. If you're more externally rotated naturally, then let's try it a totally different way. We'd sit on the heels and widen the knees. And this is usually a massive light bulb moment for people that struggle in saddle, don't like saddle, or saddle hurts their knees. So have a go at this one, widening the knees, bolsters there to support you, and then slowly take the body back. And just see if that makes a difference to the way that your knees feel. And we don't really want any pain in the knees at all. Now for some people, this is going to be too low. So we're going to need to build the bolster up. Now if you're a yin yoga teacher and you've got someone who starts to go back and then gives you the eyes of panic, you know what they look like, this is going to want to be raised up higher. Now if you've got newer students, they're probably not going to know how to prop themselves up. So it's really important for you to go over and not only prop them up, but be there to guide them in, make sure that they feel safe, and be back there in time for them to come out because they don't know what you did. And the ways that I usually prop this to start with would be either just to have one block under the head, as long as they're strong. If someone's if it's kind of sinking here, I will sometimes add another block there as well to support the middle of their spine. See, got to be there to catch it. And then make sure that they feel, you feel that moment where they settle and sink. Check with them that they feel okay to be there. Don't just kind of leave them and then be back to help them out. Saddle pose. Now for some people, this happens in my body. You'll come back into saddle. You're told by the teacher that it targets the quads, but really you mostly feel it in your back, and that's not something that you want to feel. And if that's the case, I would suggest you play with half saddle, which just means we are taking full saddle and splicing it in half. So we just target one quad and leave the other leg free. All the same things apply here in terms of the props that I just showed you on how you can set this up behind you. So let's say you're coming back into half saddle with a bolster there, and we're targeting this quad. The beautiful thing about this shape is that whether you're more internally or externally rotated naturally, you can let your pelvis roll so the pelvis doesn't have to be square. And I like to use this foot on the floor as a bit of a driver. So there's a bit of yang in that leg, pushing and steering me around until I really get that sensation where I want it to be in my quad. There is always going to be a couple of people in the room that just can't feel comfortable in either of those. So how can we help people target their quads if saddle or half saddle is a no-go? And maybe they've got knee injuries. Maybe their quad tissue is just so tight their body won't let them go back and they're in a state of feeling anxious or panicky. This is my little trick for that. I call this foot in a sling. Sounds like a cocktail. It's not. We'll need a belt for this one. And if you're a yin teacher watching this video, you're probably going to have to help your student get into this. If you're a student wanting to play with this at home, you might need someone to give you a hand, or you might get into it okay. So this is my alternative to help someone target their quads without any rotation creeping into the knee, because that might be the thing that's causing a lot of discomfort. We come onto the belly. And then you want to have your belt looped up evenly, and then the quad that you're targeting, bring the belt over the top of the foot. Now there's no rotation happening in the hip or the knee, it's just pure flexion at the knee. And then they can come up onto their elbows, hold the belt over their shoulder, and just see how that feels. Now that might be plenty. Another way that you can rest into this with a bit more ease, because right now I'm in a back bend, is to bring the belt with you and just snuggle down into the floor. And then they can decide how much tension they want on the quad by pulling the belt in. And this is a really nice alternative for people. So you're not just leaving people in the room hanging when everybody else is in saddle, or just telling them to rest on a bolster. That can just feel like you're being quite, not taken care of in a class. So foot in a sling is my alternative for targeting the quads if saddle or half saddle are a no-go.